Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Triple Threat Comics YouTube channel. I'm your host, Ian Miller. Tonight, I am joined by a very special guest. He's written several science fiction novels, including majority of Star Trek novels. And one of them is Lost to Eternity. But he's here to talk about his latest one, Identity Theft. Please welcome Greg Cox. Greg, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
Oh, me too. Believe me.
Yeah.
Like I said before we started the show, I've been trying to contact you since last year, since to Eternity actually came out. So
Yeah.
yeah, so I'm very excited about this.
I'm glad we managed to connect here and make this happen.
Yeah, me too. Okay, so you've been writing a number of Star Trek books for a very long time, and you've written up their media tie-in novels.
Mhm.
Which would you say is your favorite to write in the genre?
Well, it sounds like a cop out, but it's true. One of the things I like, and yeah, the bulk of my career has been writing for, what's called media tie-in novels, novels based on pre-existing movies, TV shows, comic books.
Yeah,
One of the advantages of this, besides indulging my inner fanboy, oh my God, I
yeah,
actually get to write Star Trek. I get to write Iron Man. I get to write Planet of the Apes. I get to write Xena. Um, honestly, I like the variety. I get to sort of jump from genre to genre. I mean, I love writing Star Trek. I've been writing Star Trek for, believe it or not, 30 plus years now. But if I only wrote Star Trek nonstop, I would go nuts. I like the
yeah,
variety. I can then and then I'm going to go off and I'm going to do. I did CSI. Now I can write spy thrillers. I did Alias. I can do murder mysteries. I did CSI. I can do, high fantasy. I can do horror. I did 4 underworld books. Vampires versus werewolves. So it's really funny. It allows me to sort of not get bored and stretch different muscles that, I'm not just always doing the same thing. And that's, I get to, and again, like indulging my inner fanboy, getting to, I still remember a few years back, I was novelizing a DC Comics miniseries and I found myself writing a fight between Wonder Woman and Frankenstein. And I just wanted to go back in time and tell my 12-year-old self that someday I would get paid to write a fight between Frankenstein and Wonder Woman because, like, that was like living the dream.
well, yeah. You know, you get to play with in these different worlds
Yeah.
with these different characters and really mold them into a story that entertains you, but also you hope is going to entertain everyone else.
And being like a fan who would be lining up to watch the new Star Trek movie on opening night anyway, even if I wasn't a professional Trekkie. Yeah, so I like to think that I have good instincts, or at least having fun still having fun with these characters even after 30 plus years because they've been part of my life as long as I can remember. I honestly can't remember when I didn't know about Star Trek. I was
Yeah,
6 years old when the show debuted. I have dim memories of my father letting me stay up past my bedtime to watch the show during its original run on NBC. So, and of course, the syndicated reruns played in the background of my entire childhood, adolescence, and I went to college just in time for the movies to start, which was a great time.
yeah, it is. Yeah, it must have been just fascinating to see how the characters that you knew and grew up with, were going on in the movie adventures. And, they were obviously getting older and all that, but you're like, wow, I'm getting older with them because I've been with
Exactly,
them
and
for so
also that
long.
was it was in college. I was a late bloomer. College is when I discovered organized fandom and conventions and start fan clubs. So it was cool to get together. I still remember when Star Trek: The Motion Picture came out in '79. Pretty much my entire college science fiction club. We took a road trip to Seattle to see it on opening night. So at that point, Star Trek had become a community as well as just a TV show I watched as a kid. I was conventions and I started meeting actual Star Trek writers like Rhonda McIntyre, Norman Spinrad, which sort of gave me the idea that, oh, well, this is actually a thing you can do, and this is possibly a career possibility. It wasn't until I actually started going to conventions and meeting Star Trek authors in the flesh, and oh, well, they can do this. How does this work again? Tell me more. It gave
Right,
me the idea
I
to
can
sort of,
imagine.
try to, this is an
Yeah,
option.
No,
Can't
it
say I
was a
knew
good
any Star
option.
Trek authors growing up, but once I started going to conventions, I started running into them and listening to them talk about their careers and such.
That had to have been fascinating just to hear they developing their ideas.
Yeah, Theodore
And I,
Sturgeon, Vonda
yeah,
McIntyre, Norman Spinrad, David Hartwell, who was not a writer but was a legendary science fiction editor, is the guy who launched the Star Trek book line at Simon and Schuster way back in the day, and who was
wow,
very supportive and was something of a mentor for me. So I want to mention David. So yeah,
that's incredible.
yeah. I think of myself as a second generation Star Trek writer since like I said, I learned from Vonda, Norman, and David, and various others who came before me.
Yeah, it never ceases to amaze me. Any guest that's new to me or new to the channel, I pretty much ask them how they got started, and it's always a thrill to me, how I hear everyone getting their, starting big breaks. So, but it's always the same. It's always the same. It's always something that's influenced them as a child to want to become writers and creators. So I'm glad to see this is still continuing.
And another example, like I said, David Gerald, who is still
Hmm.
who wrote the Trouble of Tribbles, among other Trek stuff. I saw
Yeah,
David just a few months ago at a convention, and I remember he had two books on the making of Star Trek, The World of Star Trek, and a whole other book on Trouble of Tribbles. I read those books to pieces when I was in junior high, and a lot about he had a lot to talk about, Star Trek and how it works and the writing of Star Treks. And I clearly, I didn't meet David Gerald himself until decades later,
yeah.
but I remember just devouring those books in junior high, and so even when long before I had any idea that I might someday end up writing Star Trek myself, I found those books fascinating. Just reading about his career as a Star Trek writer.
It's fantastic. But I'm pretty sure at this point, when you were, just starting out, you didn't foresee you were eventually going to be reading Star Trek books. But when you actually did, what was your initial reaction when you actually, when somebody told you you're going to be writing a Star Trek novel or offered it to you?
Oh, I was excited, and that I got to give credit here because to John Ordover, who's an old friend of mine, and who is was the editor of the Star Trek book line at that point. And it was John who basically recruited me and drafted me to write Star Trek novels. At the time, I had been working as a professional science fiction editor and had written a couple other books. And at the time I was a full time science fiction editor working 9 to 5 who still did some writing on the side. And basically, Deep Space Nine is how I got my foot in the door. When Deep
Yeah.
Space Nine was gearing up, the folks at Pocket Books, including John, realized that they needed to expand their stable of writers, as it were, to accommodate the ever-growing Star Trek book line. Because okay, now you had TOS books and you had TNG books. And, oh no, now we have DS9 books coming, so we need some more writers. And fortunately, at that point, I'd known John for a couple of years. We had both been assistant editors together at Tor Books. He knew I was a lifelong Trekkie. He knew I had written some Batman tie-ins for DC already. So he called, "Hey, Greg, there's this new thing, DS9 coming up. Hey, you want you want to in on the ground floor, or you want to write one of the books?" And the rest is history. In
I
fact,
think
I
this is
should
the
mention the
perfect,
fact
yeah,
that my most recent book, which just came out, Identity Theft,
yeah.
is actually dedicated to John because this is actually my 20th Star Trek novel, and it seemed past time for me to dedicate the book to John Ordover, who first, enlisted me in the Star Trek writing corps, way back in the first before the first season of Deep Space Nine. So,
I think it's fantastic that you dedicate the latest book to him, and I'm pretty sure he was tickled to death to see the dedication.
oh yeah, John and I are all friends. We're still in touch.
Yeah. Okay. Why don't we talk about the two books in particular? Let's start with Lost to Eternity for a second.
I see you're lost to Trinity, and I call you. Okay, yes.
Like a chess move. Okay, so what prompted this story in particular? Because it's taking place in three different time periods, and it's all centered around this one character from Star Trek for The Voyage Home.
Jillian.
Yeah. So what prompted this?
Well, actually, that's a case where I honestly remember the moment we came up with the idea. My wife and I were listening to a true crime broadcast, a serial or maybe one of the other ones uh, about investigating long cold cases, and somehow I came up with the idea. Oh, it would be funny if somebody these days did a true crime podcast about whatever happened to this marine biologist who mysteriously disappeared in San Francisco back in 1986. And we were like, oh my God, that's great. And my wife was like, oh, you got to do that. And it's rare I could pin the exact moment when we got the idea, but we were just sitting around one day listening to a true crime podcast, and it popped in my head that, oh, this would be perfect to do one about, whatever happened to Jillian, who just vanished from San Francisco back in 1986. And then from there, I got the idea, and then I had to sit down and expand it. And then, because it is a Star Trek novel, just for those who have not read it, there are three plot lines. There's the story of a true crime podcaster in 2026 investigating the mysterious disappearance of Jillian, which is now a cold case, very
Yeah.
cold. There's a adventure, because it is a Star Trek novel. There's an adventure involving Kirk and Spock and the crew back during the original 5-year mission. And then there's another plot line that takes place during the movie era when they're all wearing maroon uniforms, and Saavik is part of the crew, and Saavik is kind of the protagonist of that storyline. And I jump back and forth, and without being too spoilerly, the three apparently unrelated plot lines eventually do converge in a hopefully unexpected manner. But yeah, it sort of started with the idea of doing a book, having a modern day true crime investigating the events of Star Trek 4, the one with the whales. And then, okay, well, I need to get a Star Trek plot around this. And hey, now that we're jumping in time, let's do the 5-year mission and the movie era and put them all into, one big book, which ended up being a very big book. I actually ran over my contracted word count by about 10,000
Oh,
words, but
oh
nobody
my.
complained because I
Nor
didn't
should
do
they.
a big sprawling book.
Yeah, nor should they. And they were. It was a big hit there, as I recall.
Yeah. I was very gratified with how well received that book was generally, considering that it started out with this sort of oddball notion of, a third of the book involves a character we've never met, my character Melinda, who's a modern day true crime podcaster running around trying to figure out what happened way back in San Francisco, which was hard. The shocking part of writing the book was realizing just how long ago Star Trek 4 was. I
I
had to keep
know.
reminding myself that the character, she's running around and talking to the various characters we saw in that movie, like Jillian's old boss. And I had to keep reminding myself that, oh, wait, it's 40 years later. He's going to be in his 70s. Oh, the garbage men who saw the cloaked ship in the park, they're going to be in their 70s now. The nuns at the aquarium who saw Spock jump into go swimming with the whales, they're going to be retired now. It was kind of a shock just to realize how long ago 1986 was.
Oh my God. Yeah. Uh, it's absolutely mind blowing. And what was even better was you were able to take some of those side characters from the movie and show their perspective of how much this particular event
Yeah.
affected them so deeply.
Well, it turns out, like I said, if you once Melinda starts digging into it, she finds out a lot of weird stuff happened in San Francisco in those 2 or 3 days. A mysterious Russian spy in aircraft carrier, people breaking into an operating room in a downtown hospital and mysteriously vanishing, and UFO sightings in the park, and it eventually turns out that an old lady who grew a kidney, in minutes. What's the story with that? And we find out that in fact, because there is a plot, it's
Yeah.
not just that there are other people who are interested in what happened back then, and things get complicated and dangerous. Okay, because people want to know where the magical kidney pill came from, you know.
Yeah.
But it all started with just the idea of, okay, a true crime broadcast about whatever happened to Jillian, you know.
Again, that was a genius idea, and then just adding the second time period, obviously the first 5 year mission, because the way you wrote that, that was very much like an episode of the series.
And that was kind of deliberate because the Melinda plot line was kind of, you know, unusual because it was set not in the future. It was set in modern day San Francisco and involved a bunch of character, had a protagonist who isn't from the TV show. I kind of perhaps leaned a little bit, okay, when we get into the 5 year mission stuff, this is going to be, I wanted it to feel like a TV episode. So it is, you know, and we're going to see Kirk and Spock and McCoy in their prime, you know. So if just in case, as it turned out, everybody generally, you know, seemed to liked the whole 2026 storyline. But okay, if you still want your Star Trek in your Star Trek book, here is a good old fashioned Star Trek adventure set during the original 5 year mission, Prime Directive, Klingons, dangerous landing party missions. I can't remember if I killed a red shirt or not, but probably. But
you did. You did.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So that was meant deliberately to be sort of a traditional. That was me hedging my best bets, where I was sort of pushing the envelope with the Melinda storyline. Let's, you know, do good meat and potatoes Star Trek for the middle storyline.
Exactly. And then we get to the movie era where obviously the characters are older. They're on the Enterprise A. Savick has returned to the ship because Sulu is left to be commanding the Excelsior. So this takes place pre-Star Trek 6 era, I believe.
It's somewhere between Star Trek 5 and Star Trek 6. Closer to 6, maybe. I find I've written a couple of novels and novellas and things set during the movie era at this point. And I find that that gap between 5 and 6 is basically the best place you could squeeze in a standalone story. Because, you know, 2, 3, and 4 are just very tightly, they're a trilogy. They kind of pick up where the other one left off.
Yeah.
You know, and the Enterprise A is still kind of new and shaky, and they're unfamiliar with it, you know, in Star Trek 5. So again, you know, Star Trek 5 seems to come reasonably quickly after, you know, Star Trek 4, because they're all adjusting to this strange new Enterprise. So that's basically whatever I feel inclined to do a movie era story or novel. That's the best. You can also stick some between motion picture and Wrath of Khan, but that's a whole different era. And honestly, my friend and colleague Christopher Bennett has kind of staked that out as you know, who is the world's biggest TNT fan, has kind of staked that out off his turf. So I kind of leave that alone. But yeah, it's fun to bring in Savick because, you know, again, it was I did find a lot of people when I wrote Lost in Eternity seemed happy that Savick was back, because we don't really get to see much of her, and she just kind of disappears at the beginning of the Whale movie. So it was having fun, and I you know, she's not a character I've written a whole lot, so it was neat to dive into it. I also got brag. I had the pleasure of actually running into Robin Curtis at a convention not long after the book came out. By sheer dumb luck, I wish I could say I arranged this. She actually appeared at a convention in my town the summer that book came out. So I had the fun of personally presenting her with a copy of the book. And either she's a really brilliant actress, or she seemed genuinely pleased to see, oh my God, you know, it's my Savick. And she autographed a copy of the book for me. I gave her an autographed copy for me. It was great. It was, you know, real fanboy moment, you know. But so yeah, it was fun doing Savick again. I've written her a couple of times now, but yeah, it's neat, you know. And that makes also putting Savick in and making her the center of attention of that plot line helps distinguish it from the 5 year mission book. Yeah. And also, I think, hopefully made it easier for the reader to tell what era we were in when he had to do with the adventures of the Enterprise. Okay, if you open up a chapter and Savick is the main character, and Savick is the point of view character, well, you know, automatically you're not in the Melinda storyline, you know, in 2026. And you also know you're not in the 5 year mission, you know, storyline, and people aren't wearing the old 5-year 1960s. Oh, it's Savick, so we're back in the movie era. That
Yeah.
was one of my techniques of like bringing in Savick, was to clearly differentiate the two Enterprise eras. So you could, instantly, oh, Savick is on the bridge. Savick has the first line of dialogue. You know what era you are or what time it is.
Yeah. And it was also great because we got to like her as a character a bit
Mhm.
more because we obviously seen glimpses of her in Wrath of Khan and more
Yeah.
importantly, Search for Spock. So it was nice to see her, in her element, but also kind of, just enthralled in this plot. I'm not going to give too much away because I want people to obviously read the book, but you and I will know what we're talking about.
And also, honestly, besides the two movies, I went back and read some of the more Savick-centric other novels to see how she'd been portrayed in novels. And honestly, I leaned very heavily into the backstory that had been established for her by Vonda McIntyre back in, the novelization of The Wrath of Khan, as
Yeah.
well as in a very early Star Trek novel, The Pandora Principle by Carolyn Clois, which is one of the definitive Savick novels that gets really into her backstory. And so I just to get into a Savick theme, I went back and reread those, and leaned kind of heavily. For one thing, I leaned very heavily in the fact that Savick is allegedly half Romulan,
Yeah.
which was the original idea. It was, is one of these things that's kind of semi-canon in that they never actually said it on screen. That was the intent. It wasn't something us writers just made up. It was in the original script. It was they shot scenes about it. And indeed, at this point, generations of Star Trek writers and comic book writers have taken for granted that the half Romulan backstory is a thing. And
Yeah.
I wasn't going to buck that trend. I ran with it too, and leaned into the fact that she's part Romulan and part as Vonda had done, as Carolyn Clois had done.
Makes perfect sense. Okay. Let's talk about your new book, Identity Theft.
Which just came out last week, December 2nd.
Oh, fantastic, fantastic. Okay, so obviously this book also takes place in two different time periods. So while we talk about this in particular, where are we in the scheme of things? What's happening in the story?
Well, this is very much a movie era thing. The very first chapter is set back during the classic 5-year mission era.
Mhm.
But unlike Lost Eternity, where I'm jumping back and forth the whole book, that's it for the 5-year. We then jump ahead 20 years, and the rest of the book, 99% of the book, is all set during the movie era. And once again, I set it in that tantalizing gap between movies 5 and 6.
Yeah.
Although this one I set a little earlier than the other one so I could have Sulu. And I wanted, part of it is, I always try not to repeat myself. I just done the very Savick-centric story in Lost Eternity. And this book is very much about Chekhov, which we can talk about. So if I was going to do a story all about Chekhov, I wanted, because they're best friends. So this takes place, well, Sulu is so closer to the end of Star Trek V, when Sulu is still there on the bridge and has not gone off to the Excelsior yet.
Okay.
And so it's before the Lost to Eternity in terms of the movie era, and it's sometime not terribly long after Star Trek V, when the classic crew is still there. They're on the Enterprise A, but Savick has not come back and rejoined the crew yet. Incidentally, in between, I actually wrote another story. It was not a novel. I wrote a short story for Star Trek Explorer magazine, which sadly no longer exists.
Oh.
But I actually wrote a story. It was a official Star Trek magazine, which featured licensed Star Trek fiction. I actually wrote a story which was about the handover from Sulu to Chekhov. Sorry, handover from Sulu to Savick. And that was just a little 22,000 word story, but it came out about the same time as Lost to Eternity. The magazine people actually asked me for a story that tied in with Lost to Eternity. And I kind of go, well, how about, Savik, we do a story about, you know, Sulu leaving, Savik coming in, and kind of a passing of the torch story. And that was a fun little story that, it was reprinted in a short story collection too, so it's not just in the magazine. It's
Oh,
called
great.
Housewarming, yeah. But yeah, but this takes place before that. So this is Sulu's still around, and Chekhov is most definitely still around, and we are on the Enterprise A.
It's fantastic. Because at this point, Chekhov is now the security officer.
Yes, Commander Pavel Chekhov, and he is the security chief of Worf, as well as still manning his post at the navigation station.
Yeah. Okay. So this is where we are in the timeline. Could you give us any hints about the plot without revealing too much? Because I know we need to get people to buy the book.
Okay, no problem. The big thing about this, and this is not a secret, is this is the Chekhov book. That was my inspiration for this book. Chekhov is the main character of this book. He is the hero. He is the protagonist. Spock, Kirk, McCoy, Sulu, Yura, Scotty. This time around, they are supporting characters. I wanted to write a book where, Chekhov was the protagonist, give him his moment in the sun. So yeah, just around the house, I always refer to this as the Chekhov book because it's, so, if you want to read a book about, Pavel Chekhov, this is the one. Again, and the reason I did this was I hadn't done it before. As we mentioned, I've been writing Star Trek novels for 30 plus years, so I'm always on the lookout for, again, I want to keep it fresh and interesting for me. What haven't I done? And I realized, I've never really done much of Chekhov. He's been in my TOS novels. I've given him scenes here and there, but I've neglected poor Chekhov. So, I have never written a book from Chekhov's point of view. So let's do that. And also just looking around, my quick survey is there aren't a lot of Chekhov-centric novels out there, honestly.
I know.
So it seemed like something new and interesting, not just in terms of my career, but just in terms of the entire line in the history of Star Trek novels. Well, what's new as opposed to just doing another, there sure don't seem to be a lot of Chekhov novels about Chekhov out there. So it was unexplored territory. So, and then again, that sort of followed from there. That's why I wanted Sulu in the book, because Chekhov and Sulu are best buddies and have a whole history. So if you're going to do a Chekhov book, you got to have Sulu in there too. And they're both on the cover. So, yeah, the very idea is that basically Chekhov gets an adventure of his own, and without giving too much away, he gets cut up. Well, the title is identity theft. So it's not giving too much away to say that Chekhov, there's two main characters in the book. There's Chekhov and there's fake Chekhov. An imposter takes Chekhov's place aboard the Enterprise, and the real Chekhov ends up stranded on his own, cut off from Starfleet, cut off from his crew, his friends, the Enterprise, his no support system, while the fake Chekhov is up to nefarious purposes aboard the Enterprise. And I cut back and forth between those two characters. And part of that was by design, because if you're going to do a spotlight on Chekhov and give him his moment in the sun, I actually had to torture him. Otherwise, he's going to end up being subordinate to Kirk and Spock, and Okay, so I needed to get basically, kick Chekhov off the ship and drop him into a situation where he's on his own and has to rely on his own wits and training and resources without the whole Enterprise crew to back him up, and without, Captain Kirk to tell him what to do, where he's not just going, aye, aye, sir. So you start with the idea that this is a good bit of Chekhov. So then let's give Chekhov his own standalone adventure, which means kicking him off the Enterprise and throwing him to the wolves, as it were, and making life very difficult for Chekhov for most of the book. And meanwhile, you've got the suspense, hopefully, of the fake Chekhov. His name is Raijo, who is trying to, in fact, who's actually in a bit of a pressure cooker himself, because he's trying to impersonate Chekhov. which turns out to be a much harder and tricky, trying to actually be Pavel Chekhov and live up to his standards and fool Sulu and Scotty and the rest, and actually, turns out that actually, being Chekhov is much more challenging than he imagined. Okay.
I think it's a fair assessment.
That's the high concept of the book. It's
Well, I love the concept because again, we don't get a lot of Chekhov centered stories, first of all, and
yeah.
and we all know that Chekhov is a capable Starfleet officer. So it's very interesting to see him in an environment where he doesn't have the backing of his captain and the rest of his crew. So,
Yeah.
like, okay, what's Chekhov really made of? Because we've seen him on away missions. We know what he's capable of, but let's see what he's made of.
That was kind of, it was like gave him his own sort of solo adventure. So
Yeah,
Chekhov, again, without being too spoiled, Chekhov is, on his own and trying to survive some very hazardous situations for most of the book, you know, and and I tried to make life as difficult as possible for him because A, that makes the book work, and because besides he's Chekhov, you gotta torture Chekhov. Okay, yeah.
well,
So
yeah,
in order to, like you said, show, see what he rise to the occasion. And indeed, without giving too much away, the fake Chekhov discovers he has to rise to the occasion to live up to the high standards of the real Chekhov, especially when things get much hairier and emergency situations develop. And, well,
yeah,
the whole, well, Chekhov, it's, there's a reason why, Chekhov is still on the ship. And,
yeah.
living up to Chekhov's, standards turns out to be harder than he expected. Okay.
Well, it definitely makes sense to have Sulu on the ship still because he could probably sense a couple of things are not quite up, with Chekhov. But that was a very great thing to do, and the whole concept alone just is exciting, because again, you're doing your best, to shake things up a bit, not make it too stale.
Yeah. And like I said, that was a large reason of, why write a book about Chekhov? Because, well, there aren't a lot of books about Chekhov. There, aren't a lot of Chekhov-centric episodes. So, and also, what haven't I done before? Oh, I've, written McCoy, I've written Spock, I've done Kirk-centric stories. Oh, I had not
Yeah,
done Chekhov, so it was something new and interesting for me to do. It was setting myself a challenge to write a whole book about Chekhov. Though, just to be clear, Kirk and Spock and McCoy are all in the book, and they have their hero moments, but
well, of course, it's Kirk and Spock and McCoy and the rest of the crew. I mean, come on, you gotta have those heroic moments, but without taking away from Chekhov's moment as well, because
but yeah,
this is his
we
story.
get to see, the rest of the crew, and they all have their moments because you can't write a Star Trek TOS novel without Kirk and Spock and the
Yeah.
others. But Chekhov is in the line. He's very much the protagonist in this book.
Well, this is fantastic. I did buy the digital copy of the novel. I had to get the physical one at some point soon. I did start reading it, and I'm enjoying it so far, and I can't wait to see how it ends.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad. I see we're trying not to spoil you as well. Okay.
Well, yeah, because again,
Yeah.
I'm also a fan myself, so I don't
Yeah.
want to get
Exactly.
spoiled. Yeah. So yeah, in fact, when I do finish it, I'll probably give you a full in-depth interview, review about it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Definitely. Yeah. Well, this is the great part because you right. I probably came up with this idea like a year and a half, 2 years ago. Writing books is a slow process. You write the books, and then it works its way laboriously through the publishing process of edits and approvals and copy edits and proofreadings and revisions and third drafts. So by the time the book finally comes out, it's like, oh my God, I can finally talk about this in this book. Um,
Yeah.
they didn't have long, slow gestation periods.
Well, that must be mind-boggling, because you're like, well, they said they liked it. Well, what happens next? do I get to edit, or what do I have to do? So that
Mhm.
has to be nerve-wracking.
Yeah. Well, at this point, like I said, fortunately, at this point, the I have been, again, writing Star Trek novels for 30 plus years.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty, well honed, system. Things tend to go very smoothly. I like to think I know what I can get away with and what I can't get away with in terms of approvals. And it's a very streamlined system. Although I'd say just to get heavy for a moment, I have to give a moment of. This book had a little bit of a wrinkle in that Margaret Clark, who has been my editor on the last several Star Trek novels,
Mm.
and who was passed away during the writing of this book.
Oh.
And I mentioned that not to bring everything down, but simply I want to
Mm.
give credit to Margaret. She was very heavily involved in the early stages of this book. Her input, she had a lot of input into the outline, and we discussed the book. Sadly, she did not live to see the final manuscript, but I keep, as I'm doing interviews about this book, I mentioned that, Margaret's fingerprints are all over this book. If you like this book, Margaret, played a big part in it, and, she will be missed.
Well, I'm sorry for that happened.
Yeah.
Because obviously you were very close with her as well during
Oh
the
yeah,
editing
Margaret and
process.
I have been working, yeah,
Yeah.
known each other for years, long talks. I won't, but yeah, so, Margaret was, for those who know, was a veteran Star Trek author going back, sorry, editor going back decades. And, you know, it was very, a bit of a jolt when she passed on, and, but I've been taking time out always to want to give, pay homage to her efforts, not just on this book, on several of my previous books as well. So, and on several other Star Trek novels written by, other people,
Yeah.
she's had a big, she had a big hand, in shaping, Star Trek novels along with, many other editors I've worked. At this point, I've been around long enough that I've been, gone from the John Ordover era to, I've worked with, Ed Schlesinger, Marco Palmieri, Scott Pearson,
Yeah.
Margaret, etc.
Well, I'm glad you're taking the time to actually talk about her, especially with the books and all that. So, yeah,
There is a fulsome appreciation of her in the back of the book as well, when you get to the acknowledgments.
again, I had to look forward to that.
Yeah. But yeah, one thing about Star Trek novels in particular, I should talk about. I always mentioned it's a very collaborative process because there's a lot of cooks involved. But like I said, at this point, the whole Star Trek thing it's a well-oiled machine, and people ask me where you get the ideas and everything. It's all, like I said, you know working with the people at Simon Schuster, working with the people at CBS. Typically, for those who don't know how this works, I usually begin with me writing a 12-page outline. It gets sent it to the editor. They ask for comments, changes, revisions. We bounce it up to CBS. They provide their input, have suggestions, comments. Typically goes back and forth a few times until we get a plot line that everybody likes, and then I get the green light to go ahead and write the book. So and then we do the whole thing again when the finished book is done and bounced around, comments, suggestions, and
Yeah.
so it's very much a team effort.
Well, was there any point, and this could be with any of the books, it doesn't have to be this, but one specifically, was there any point where CBS kind of said, you know what, I don't think we should have this particular section in the book. Maybe we should take
But
it
that's
out.
just part of the process. Yeah.
Yeah.
And did tire ideas. Occasionally, you'll pitch an idea for a book, and they'll say, "We'd rather you not do that." And that's fine because you're playing with their toys.
Yeah.
And again, I haven't written a 300-page book. I'll write a 12-page outline, or maybe I'll just come. Hey, I have an idea. I want to do a book about how Q met Guinan, and we'd rather keep that mysterious. Okay, fair enough. It's your franchise. We will.
Yeah.
Yeah, honestly, that's an idea I pitched back in the 90s. And at that time, it was like, we prefer to keep that mysterious. So okay, next idea. Yeah, okay. So, yeah, no, okay. Sometimes and indeed, sometimes I've been saved for myself. Yeah. Okay, Greg, you really want to do that? No, 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 no. Yeah. I remember, and sometimes you get these notes that are, Janeway should. I remember I got a note once. Janeway should not drink coffee in the transporter room. Okay, fair enough. I guess that's dangerous. You don't want to, But yeah, or they may come up with good ideas, suggestions, And sometimes, like I said, sometimes I come up with the starting premise. Hey, what about, true crime case involving Jillian? Sometimes they'll come to me and say, hey, Greg, we want a book for July and we want it to be about the Borg. Oh, okay. So, give me a Borg book.
Yeah.
Or, John Ordover came to me literally once and said, hi, I want to do a trilogy called The Q Continuum. What have you got? And I went away and indeed, even my very first Deep Space Nine novel, John Ordover came up with the basic premise, which was baby Hortas invade Deep Space Nine. And does that appeal to you? Sure. And I, take it and run with it, And then sometimes I'll come back and say, I really want to do a novel about, Chekhov. Okay, fine, No one said, Chekhov, really? No. Yeah. I got no pushback at the idea of doing a Chekhov-centric novel, but
Well, I think it's
I think
about
I was
due.
once warned not to even try submitting a sequel to Spock's Brain. That's not going to fly, Greg.
Oh God.
Don't even think about it, Greg. Okay,
I couldn't even believe that episode. And when I saw that,
Yeah.
I was like, somebody stole his brain. How is he still alive?
I remember once I was joking around with Margaret Clark, and I think I was talking about the fact there were very few Star Trek novels of the original series, of the original 79, that haven't inspired a novel sequel or two. And she said, don't even think about Spock's brain, Greg. Okay.
Well,
Duly
because it's a
noted.
bizarre, yeah, it's a bizarre thing to do a sequel to. It was a bizarre episode, and yeah,
That's something you do a sequel to on Lower Decks.
yes, but not the original series. So
Maybe not a 300-page novel. Okay, but
no.
but no, so like
That
I said, no, I'll throw ideas. And this is not me complaining. This is just how it works. Indeed, not just with Star Trek novels. I've written a lot of novels based on other people's intellectual properties, and
yeah,
they've got strong opinions. And you pitch an idea to the librarians people or the warehouse 30 people, and sometimes they say yes, and sometimes they say no, and sometimes you compromise, and sometimes you go in a different direction. I do remember at one point I wrote 3 novels based on the Librarians TV series. That was the fantasy series. At one point, I pitched them an idea involving Norse mythology, and they came back and said, as was their right, no, Greg, we're doing Norse mythology next season. So what else have you got? And I actually threw at them more or less randomly. Mother Goose. What about? Oh yeah, Mother Goose. That's good. We like that. Do Mother Goose. I swear to God, all I had at that point was 2 words: Mother Goose. I remember going downstairs and telling my girlfriend, I think I just agreed to write a 300-page fantasy novel about Mother Goose. Great, now I need to think of one. But yeah, that's how sort of the process works. The challenge is always finding something and indeed, pretty much every time writer I know has the experience of pitching an idea that's like, well, we're doing that next week, Greg, Dayton, Una, whoever, And yeah, I remember sometimes it's like trying to come up with something what hasn't the show done yet, and it turns out they're doing it next week or next season or whatever. Then you're on the right wavelength, but you have to come up with another idea. So yeah, the whole tie-in thing is sort of an interesting little niche of publishing, and like I said, there's a lot of give and you need to kind of check your ego at the door and remember this is a team project, and you are not.
Yeah.
You're playing in somebody else's sandbox, so you got to play along and be
Yeah, you got to be a team
no room
player.
for prima donnas.
Yes. Yeah, that's always the thing that's always fascinated me about the publishing industry, especially when you're doing tie-in novels,
Yeah.
because you're dealing with not just your editor,
Mhm.
or the publisher. You're also dealing with the people that actually own the rights to said tie-in media tie-in project.
And like I said, sometimes they can be very hands-on, as you know, and protective of their property as they should be.
Yeah,
But yeah, fortunately, Star Trek again. Like I said, we've had a good relationship. Back in the day, Paula Block used to handle approvals, and she was like the ideal for licensing person. And these days, Dayton Ward is doing some of the oversight and everything. And all the copy editors, and it's a
yeah,
like I said, Star Trek novels at this point have been running have been a thing for almost as long as there's been Star Trek. So we're going on like 60 years, and there are literally hundreds of them. You know, and at this
yeah,
point, generations of writers and editors and copy editors and licensing people, and but
yeah.
obviously it works. Hey, I've been managing to make it work for 30 plus years now. So
Yes, clearly something worked, and you're still having fun doing it. You're still having
oh,
fun writing it.
absolutely. You'd think you would get jaded, but I still get thrilled when I have a new book coming out. I'm haunting my front porch, waiting for my author's copy to show up. Oh my God, it's a book.
Yeah,
Got to run around and show it to everybody, show off. So yeah, the thrill is still there, and just being able to write for Star Trek and these characters, and not to mention giving me an excuse to go back and okay, I'm going to go back and watch all the Chekhov centric episodes of TOS because this is research.
yeah, and there have been at least a couple of number of them. Because I was going to ask that originally, saying what you obviously use certain episodes to kind of figure out. Okay, this is how Chekhov really acts,
Yeah.
especially in an emergency moment.
Yeah, I tried to go back and watch, like I said, a lot of Chekhov centric episodes. Although what I discovered watching them is there really aren't that many. What
Yeah.
Chekhov has is moments. He has great moments. There are a few times I remember an episode being very Chekhov-y, to coin a
Mhm.
phrase, and I would watch it and then realize, oh no, what I remembered was that Chekhov, Walter Koenig had a couple of great scenes, but honestly, oh, he's not in it as much as I remembered. It's a testament to Walter Koenig that I actually remembered that as being Chekhov's part in those episodes as being much. I remember one time I sat down to watch an episode. Oh, this is a Chekhov episode. We're 2 acts in and Chekhov hasn't had a line yet. But yeah, Chekhov. Yeah, but Walter Koenig makes the most of Chekhov's moments when he gets them. And I did
Yeah.
watch it. You watch the episodes and you can see how he reacts to situations, and Well, I discovered it was less a case of there being Chekhov episodes as there being great classic Chekhov moments. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I remember there was one episode where he's the acting science officer because Spock is on the plant,
yeah,
and he's at the obviously at the monitor at Spock's workstation, and he's totally focused. He's in the zone. He's telling Scotty, this is what's happening on this planet, and he's coming up with a theory that they have to do this to get the captain and Spock back.
yeah. Yeah, I remember there's an episode where McCoy talks about Spock rubbing off on Chekhov. They kind of originally kind of were positioning Chekhov as kind of Spock's protege or something.
Yeah.
Which is something I kind of ran with a little bit. There's an earlier novel I wrote, The Antares Maelstrom, which was a few years back, where I did pair up a Spock and Chekhov on a dangerous landing mission. And that was the closest I've come to doing much of Chekhov before that. And I kind of leaned into, Spock as mentor to the young Chekhov thing, which was touched
Yeah.
on in the episode. And I kind of leaned into that. And that was a subplot in another book.
Well,
I did less with that, I think, in this book because I'd already done a whole book of just pairing the two of them up on a dangerous mission before.
yeah, and also Chekhov is 20 years older in this particular book, and he's
Exactly. This is
obviously
not the young green Chekhov. This is the somewhat older, world weary, somewhat battered by life middle-aged Chekhov. He's like in his 40s. I did the math,
Yeah.
So we see a little bit of the young green Chekhov in the prologue, as it were. And then we jump ahead 20 years to the somewhat older, somewhat more sober now, Commander Pavel Chekhov, who is chief of security on the Enterprise and takes his job very seriously. But
yeah, that was the thing about Chekhov for me. He always did take his position very seriously.
oh yes, he's and of course I could not resist throwing in a few of, as we say in Russia, famous Russian saying, famous Russian saying, So he's still Chekhov, because you can't write a Chekhov novel without doing that a couple times.
No. And yeah, like I said, like you said, you studied those particular moments of Chekhov, especially how he says certain things. You're like, okay, I could definitely mimic this.
Well, I like to think that as a talent I have, I'm just patting myself on the back, as an Italian writer, when I've been doing this, is I'm a fairly good literary impressionist in that I can capture the voices of the characters, because nothing turns off readers, I find, than someone reading a Star Trek book and going, Data would never say that, or it doesn't sound like McCoy. So, and I think I'm a pretty good mimic of characters' voices, and I try to encourage that by like immersion. When I was writing this book in the evening, I would put on Spectre of the Gun or The Apple, just to sort of get the rhythm of. It's not like I don't. When it comes to the TOS characters, it's not like I know these characters' voices in my head because I've known them since I was 6 years old. But yeah, I try to refresh my memory. I remember I wrote a 7 of 9 novel a few years ago, and at that point it had been some time since I'd watched Voyager, so I pulled out the box set from the DVDs, and I remember I did kind of a marathon, and I binge watched a whole bunch of 7-centric episodes of Voyager just to get her voice and get it back into into my head, so that hopefully 7 would sound like 7 in the novel. Especially since it sounds to me at that point I had never written 7 before, because my one and only Voyager novel was way back in the Kess era.
Oh.
It shows you how long I've been writing Star Trek novels. Yes, I wrote a Kess-centric. Yeah, Kess is actually on the cover of my Voyager novel. So,
well, again, it's good to refresh, especially after so many years. Like, okay, what was this particular character? Well, what were they like? So yeah,
so like I said, I like to just sort of go back and immerse myself in if only else, especially if I've been going off and doing something else. I've been writing Librarians or Terminator or CSI. Okay, time to get back in the Star Trek groove. Let's sit down and watch some Star Trek movies and episodes. Oh no, twist my arm, make me sit down and watch a bunch of Star Trek episodes. Get back in the groove.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I don't think it would be twisting of the arm. Yeah. It's
not exactly
such a strain. Such a strain watching a couple of my favorite episodes of some of my favorite series. Yeah, it's a strain.
So that's like I said, you want to try to capture their voices, and that's
that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, so that's sort of my trick to doing it, is, like I said, immersing myself and just reabsorbing the voices and listening to them and starting to get the rhythms back in my head again.
Fantastic. Greg, I can't thank you enough to come on here to talk to us about your career, and particularly these two Star Trek books. I can't wait to finish it.
Well, I'll be curious to hear. I am curious, really, to find out what you think of it after you finish reading the book. Yeah.
Trust me, you're probably gonna get an email from me, detailing what I like specifically, because I'm also a Trekker fan. So trust me, you gotta get something from me.
And like I said, that's great, because, like I said, you write the books in isolation, and they're out in the world. Nothing is worse than throwing a book out into the world and then crickets. Fortunately, that's not a problem with Star Trek.
No.
Star Trek is, trust me, you get lots of input, and Star Trek fans have opinions.
I hope they're positive opinions. I hope they're not negative.
I'm lucky enough that they are mostly positive. But like I said, you have to have a thick.
Yeah,
It helps to have a thick skin, even not just writing Star Trek novels, but writing for
exactly.
all these beloved characters, Godzilla,
Yeah,
Planet of the Apes, whatever. Yeah, you don't want to
uh,
be a writer unless you have a thick skin,
yeah.
and and the knowledge that you can't always please everybody. So
That's really the key thing right there.
yeah,
Well, folks, if you want to actually purchase Star Trek Identity Theft, yeah, it's at the link below on Amazon. I would definitely recommend it. If you hadn't read Lost to Eternity yet, I seriously suggest that you read it.
thank you very much. Yeah,
Of course, it was wonderful having you on, and I hope to have you on again to help you promote another book that you're doing.
keep me in mind. You have my email address.
And you have mine.
Yes.
Well, folks, I think that's going to be it for us tonight. In case I don't see you for about maybe a couple weeks, happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Yeah. And hey, maybe this will be a Christmas gift for somebody. You never know.
Everybody has a Trekkie in their family.
Exactly. Well, I'm A. Miller, and this has been Triple Threat Comics YouTube channel. Have a great night, folks.